guy, and today, 9:30 tonight, rather I should say, he's on the West Coast, so it still is today. But Convo with Kanno, with my man Jason Kanno. Mr. Kanno, how you doing tonight?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So we were just finishing up some NBA talk. So thank you for joining us, and we're going to move into a little bit of NFL news. So one, I wanted to start off. Are you surprised or nothing gets by you or anything with the Super Bowl? We got a Patriots versus Eagles Super Bowl. Is that a surprise to you or not?
I mean, the Patriots being in the Super Bowl really should never be a surprise to anybody. I mean, they do what they do, and it works out for them, obviously. It's a little surprising that the Eagles kind of stomped the Vikings as badly as they did, especially with Nick Foles as the quarterback. That was a little unexpected. But had you asked me a while ago when before the injury to what's his face?
Carson Wentz.
Oh man, Carson Wentz. Before Carson Wentz got hurt, I would have said absolutely they're a shoo-in. They're a favorite to win the Super Bowl. At this point, though, it was a little bit of a shock.
Yeah, I think I had picked the Minnesota Vikings to win that game, and actually I picked the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I was looking really, really good at probably the first 2 quarters, maybe 2.5 quarters, and then Brady was Brady, and that was the end of the story, with that. But so obviously I went 0-2, last week, but nonetheless, we'll get into a little bit of football talk here. And we were just talking about Nick Foles, but we also going to talk about Case Keenum as well. So these are 2 guys that came in as backups, and obviously they started because of injuries to other quarterbacks. So 2-part question. We'll first start, with Case Keenum. So we know there's a quarterback situation there because no one is technically under contract at all after this season. So what do you see as the future for Case Keenum? Is it there? Is it somewhere else? Where is Case Keenum going to be next year?
Oh, that's a huge question. I mean, you're talking about 3 guys who have proven that they can lead the Vikings offense to success. So that is the $1 million question, or probably the $20 million question for the Vikings and probably 2 other NFL franchises. I could see them sticking with Keenum, but at the same time, given the draft picks they invested in Sam Bradford and Teddy Bridgewater, because they traded a pick for Sam Bradford, and obviously they drafted Teddy Bridgewater themselves. So with Case Keenum, they picked him up as a cheap free agent. They might be willing to let him walk. There's so many other factors that go into it. Obviously, how healthy will Bridgewater or Bradford be next year? I mean, Sam Bradford's had a long history of injuries, and Bridgewater nearly died from that catastrophic knee injury he suffered 2 years ago. So, at this point, it's anybody's guess. There's clearly a lot of medical stuff that has to be considered, but I wouldn't be surprised if they went with any of those 3 guys.
Yeah, because Keenum, he's been back up, other places, and he played a few games here and there, But Bradford, yeah, that's the biggest thing on Bradford that's so frustrating about him, is that he cannot stay healthy, and it's not his fault. You can't be blamed for getting injured, but you're playing a violent sport. But yeah, that's the frustrating part, with a guy like Sam Bradford. Now, with a guy like Nick Foles, again, another backup quarterback, but he did have success, surprisingly with the Eagles, when Chip Kelly was there as a starter, and he went other places and it just didn't work out. Now, especially if he wins this thing in the Super Bowl, you got to think, obviously they're not going to, replace him and send Carson Wentz on his way. But you got to think, what can happen for Nick Foles? Is he going to be thrown into, the conversation with, your Kirk Cousins and all this stuff, of where they may go?
I mean, honestly, I think if whoever pulls the trigger on Nick Foles as their next guy, they're making a mistake. Foles is doing okay with the Eagles, but I mean that team is humming. The entire team it's a team success at this point. Carson Wentz definitely put them over the top, but between the defense, their offensive line, the way they're spreading out the run game, everything's clicking for them now. So why the Eagles, I wouldn't count them out even with Nick Foles at quarterback to win the Super Bowl simply because of how well they're playing at every facet of the game. But Nick Foles himself, he's benefiting from an excellent offensive situation around him. He's got probably the best offensive line in football. He's got a great coach in Doug Peterson. He's had his shot in other places. It's just this situation where if you surround him with the best possible talent and in a great coaching situation, he's adequate, which is not a situation you want. He's not going to lead your franchise, but you get the sense that if he wins the Super Bowl, the Browns will probably go pick him up.
Right. And you said something that stuck out to me as well when you brought up Doug Peterson. This guy, Doug Peterson, when the news was announced, that he was going to be the coach, people, kind of looked at it and kind of scoffed at or laughed at the Eagles, at this point and thought that they were just getting kind of a joke of a coach, and Nick Foles, if you look at it, he had Chip Kelly, he had success under him, and now, it's a very small sample size, but he had success with Doug Peterson. You got to think, like you were just talking about with Nick Foles, and someone said in the chat room saying, fool's goal, is it, maybe he's with the right coach, and maybe he just really needs to stay and be a backup, but yeah, it may be a big mistake. So these are, valid points that you make here, Mr. Kanno. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Wait a Minute Show with your man, Jelani JB Bodie. And I got my special guest, my football contact, Jason Kanno. So this is Convo with Kanno. And now that we're going to get into a little bit of coaching news as well. And I was on last week's show. And I was talking about, my beloved Detroit Lions. Yes, those Lions. But someone asked me, was I excited? Because basically the news is that, Patricia is going to be the coach, coming out of there. And then I just started thinking, of this coaching tree that has come out under Belichick hasn't been that great. So, and Josh McDaniels looked like he's going to be the second time around with the Colts. Should people be, excited, or how do you feel, about these coaches, coming out being head coaches now? Do you think any, success will, pour over into the new teams like it has been with the Pats?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously that history of Pats coordinators taking the next step, becoming head coaches themselves and not succeeding. Josh McDaniels himself did not do well in Denver his first time around, but some of that you could attribute to some personnel decisions, but really he was not ready. I mean, he was also the youngest head coach at the time, maybe just edged out a little bit by Raheem Morris with the Bucks, and neither one of them succeeded, obviously, but there's a lot of talk about him maturing lately, and maybe he's better at communicating with his players. I don't know. Honestly, I feel someone who makes a great coordinator should make a great coach. Obviously, that is not the case. Otherwise, Dick LeBeau would be one of the greatest head coaches ever. Or I don't just think of any other coordinator that's Wade Phillips, who's probably the best who's been the best defensive coordinator in the league for the past half decade.
Yeah,
but he completely flamed out with the Cowboys. With Patricia, I don't know. He gets a really good rap in terms of his ability to connect with players. He's doing some amazing things with a defense that really doesn't have any marquee playmakers. After Dante Hightower went down, who did he have? He had really nobody, no big names, nobody who really stood out on that defense, and yet they continue to get it done week after week. So it comes down to, who's he going to bring on staff, and, what kind of organizational skills does he have? Can he get along with the GM? What kind of philosophy is he going to bring presuming he takes the job in Detroit? So there, of course, being a first-time head coach, there's no real, obviously, if there were a way to tell that this person's going to be a great head coach, they would have figured that out by now, and they'd hire that way. But you hire a head coach in the NFL, you're always rolling the dice.
Yeah. And the Giants, we're going to talk about the Giants here. They got a new coach, and Pat Shurmur, coming from the Minnesota Vikings. And like you were just saying, a great coordinator, doesn't necessarily make a great coach. But in this situation, because the Giants were looked at, and I had them winning the division this past season. So they were looked at as a team that was supposed to be in this high-power offense. Obviously, they struggled, with the offensive line and everything. But we saw how Jacksonville turned everything around. Now, I'm not saying the Giants are Jacksonville, but we saw how they turned things around in 1 year. Can Pat Shurmur have an immediate impact, on the New York Giants?
That depends on not just Shurmur, but on their GM, Dave Gettleman, because, that offensive line is probably the worst in the NFL. It looks like Eli Manning's done, but I won't say that for certain because, with quarterbacks, you put them with the right coordinator that you see a resurgence. Obviously, Ben McAdoo did a horrible job in New York this year, so it could just, you just change some faces a little bit and you get him back to where he was a couple of years ago. I can't say that for certain with any sort of certainty, but there's always that possibility. Shurmur, he has a good track record with getting the most out of his quarterbacks, and he really did turn around the offensive line for the Vikings, which last year they probably took that title for the worst offensive line in the league. They have to get some better personnel. They have to consider replacing Eric Flowers already, which says enough about their previous front office. And if Shurmur doesn't feel confident about Eli Manning, they're also in the market for a quarterback. It would not surprise me if they drafted one in the first round, because Eli Manning is getting up there in age, so they might just go ahead and turn the page.
Yeah, and you bring up Eli Manning, which, leads me into my next question. It has a little bit to deal with Eli Manning, but so Eli is staying in New York at this point. That's what Pat Shurmur is saying. He's not trying to get rid of him. So the whole rumor was that Eli was going to go to Jacksonville, but Blake Bortles, and people may say I'm crazy, but Blake Bortles played pretty well, through this playoffs. Other than the Buffalo game, that wasn't too great, but he played pretty decent, through this postseason. So, what do you think is on the table for Blake Bortles at this point? Going into year two, possibly, with new coaches, and obviously with the success that they had this previous year.
I think, again, a lot of this you can, Bortles' success this year, you can attribute a lot of that to coaching, because Doug Maroney put him in a lot of the situations that he put him in were dedicated to his success. There's a better way I can put that, I'm sure, but you look at a lot of the plays that they were running. Obviously it was a run-first offense. They didn't ask him to do a whole lot. He wasn't throwing the ball down the field. Obviously, he did, not having Allen Robinson affects a lot of that, but they weren't asking him to run the offense entirely on his own. It was I don't even want to say it was a balanced attack, because they were seriously running the ball even when they weren't getting great yardage. So when you're letting him lean on the run game like that, you're definitely limiting the potency of your offense. And I think that is something they have to realize going forward, that, Bortles is only so good. He can manage the offense, sure,